been attending ever since, more or less as well, at the very beginning.
I'll be able to see everyone. I'll just have them give a quick introduction and share some information. And the first person that I'd like to introduce is Bruce Leithrop. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks. I'm Bruce Leithrop. I'm a IP attorney, corporate attorney, government contracts attorney, and but more importantly, I think for this audience is I'm involved with a group called Media, M-A-D-I-A tech.org, and we are having a presentation next week with a startup or a spin out from Caltech, startup as well. I think it's Cienza, and they do batteries. So the chief operating officer will be speaking to us in Duarte. So it's at 6:30 next Wednesday in the evening. You can do it by Zoom or you can do it in person. So go to our website, mediatech.org, and check it out, and there's a link. Thanks.
And that website again was Media, M-A-D-I-A Tech, T-E-C-H.org?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bruce, for sharing that information. And I am going to ask Amy, who's also one of our regulars, to introduce a startup that she has that's involved in the real estate industry.
Thank you, John. Good morning, and nice to meet you all. Finally come back to the in-person meeting. My name is Amy Kwan, and I'm the founder of DoubleDoor.io. DoubleDoor is a vertical marketplace to facilitate residential property transaction for foreign investors. So inbound and outbound. Inbound means a foreign investor buy in U.S. Outbound means when American buy in other country. So you would want to come in DoubleDoor and check the listing and check the agent to make sure your investment is not at risk. We're early stage. The last 2 years has been very difficult for us, but we just marked our 5 years from the day we registered a company, and we also make it to the top 10 or 20 lists in LinkedIn that we are one of the most innovative and growth startup in Los Angeles. But when I check the list, the list have company like CBRE, so we are not just a LA startup, we are basically ranked by with other global companies. So check us out, DoubleDoor.io. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And then the last person I'd like to introduce is Mike Chen. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Chen. I'm the CEO and founder of Cohere Marketplace. We're an online wholesale marketplace connecting up-and-coming brands with non-traditional retailers. So any brands they can sell locally anywhere in the world. And then for any participating retailers, they get a free foot traffic and extra sales in their existing space without any extra efforts. So right now we went through a pivot during the pandemic, but right now we're launching in about a month. It's the website would be called www.thecohere.com. And then thank you very much. Happy to be in person finally.
Thank you very much, Mike. And Christy, I think I'm going to turn it back to you so that we can start hearing from our speaker, Alex, since he's going to be talking about something very exciting in the space industry.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. John, can you keep an eye on this and check LinkedIn to see if we are going live on that at the same time? So we are so pleased to have Alex here with us this morning. He actually spoke for us about a year ago in partnership with the Alliance for SoCal Innovation Partners on seed funding and a special program that they have in place there. But today, he is here for us to learn about his new venture, Mandala Space Ventures. And it's a venture capital organization focused on space innovation. Many of you already know Alex. He's quite famous in our community. He has done many things, including being the general managing director previously at Idealab, so some of you might know him through his work there. He has also taken senior leadership roles on 2 startups that have been acquired in the past, and he serves on many boards. He is a board member of Exosphere OE Wave, a previous board member at Innovate Pasadena, and one of our favorites, Steam Coders. So please welcome Alex.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you everyone at Friday Coffee Meetup for having me. Thank you, Echo Factory and industrious. Special thanks to Brittany for helping me get set up this morning. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about space, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mandala Space Ventures, and then we'll open it up. So who am I? This is my very serious-looking picture. I've spent my entire career in startups. I've done a little bit of everything, sales, marketing, operations. I spent the last 13 and a half years at Idealab, working with Bill Gross and Marcia Goodstein, Tom McGovern, and others, helping them spin out their companies. And then I joined Mandela in January of this year. But I'm a regular Joe. This is what your face looks like when you get a hole-in-one, and you have to share it with everyone once you get one. But I've got a young son. I like to take fishing. He's got a twin sister. We like to go hiking. And behind every decent man is a better partner. And this is my wife and I 30 years ago when we were teenagers. And yes, my hair still looks the same. So what is space? Well, if you look it up in the dictionary, it says the dimensions of height, depth, and width within which all things exist and move. So it's essentially everything, right? And what is outer space? Well, the physical universe beyond the Earth's atmosphere. So if we define space as everything beyond the Earth's atmosphere and Earth, we now know what we're talking about. But space is really big. How big is it? Well, this is our beautiful Milky Way, the galaxy where we reside. And there are roughly 200 to 300 billion stars in the Milky Way. This is our neighboring galaxy, Andromeda. It's about 2.5 trillion light years away from us. 1 light year is roughly 5.8 trillion miles. So some simple math, 2.5 trillion times 5.8 trillion. It's really, really far away. They're thought to be roughly 1 billion stars in Andromeda. So between the two of us, there's quite a few stars in these two galaxies. The crazy part for me is it's not just these two galaxies. In fact, some people think in the observable universe, there's somewhere between 200 billion and 1 trillion galaxies. So if each galaxy has somewhere between 200 billion and 1 trillion stars, and there's 200 billion to 1 trillion galaxies, there's quite a few stars out there. So the fact that we haven't found any other friends in space is quite surprising when you think about it statistically. So when did we start caring about space? Well, ostensibly, we've been caring about it forever, right? There's been lore and story and myth as long as time began. If you ask some of my relatives, the aliens brought us here a long time ago. But space exploration really began on October 4th, 1957. That's when the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. A month later, they actually launched another satellite with the first living creature, a dog named Laika. Unfortunately, Laika did not make it, and I won't tell you the details of that, but that was the first living creature that was launched into space. In January the following year, the U.S. entered space with a satellite called Explorer. And then in 1958, the U.S. consolidated space efforts under a new government agency called NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. On April 21st, 1961, the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. And then from 1968 to 1972, the United States had the Apollo program, which we all know, I think, fairly well. This took astronauts around the moon and onto the lunar surface. Also in 1971, the first space station was launched by the Soviets. And in 1984, Bruce McCandless became the first person to do a spacewalk without being attached to a spacecraft, something I will never do, even if I had the opportunity. And in 1998, we began building the ISS, the International Space Station. Interesting fact about the space station is it's been continuously occupied since then. So ever since then, we've had somebody up in space doing some sort of work, some sort of research, looking out beyond and looking down on Earth. And then, of course, now we are very interested in space for a variety of reasons. So now that we've done our little history about space and I've shown you how big it is, we'll try to narrow it down just a little bit. When we talk about space, you'll hear people talking about LEO, GEO, and MEO, and these are not the three musketeers. These are acronyms for low Earth orbit, geostationary orbit, and medium Earth orbit, although I always want to say middle Earth orbit, but that might be me. And if you see these clusters, the very dark circle around Earth is LEO, lower Earth orbit. And most of the activity that happens in space is in LEO. So the space station is in LEO, Earth observation satellites, spy satellites, communication satellites, Starlink's constellation from Spacex that has been helpful in a variety of ways as of recent is in LEO. And there are roughly 7,500 satellites operating in low Earth orbit. Their outer ring you see there, which is the sort of next concentration of objects, is GEO. So most commercial communications and broadcast satellites operate in GEO. In between, you see some speckles there, and MEO. MEO is the least busy of all the orbits, and that's where you'll find GPS and things like that have helped us and are in your pocket probably right now. So what about now? Well, in 2019, according to a conference I was just at, there were tracking roughly 25,000 objects in space. We're now in 2022, and we're tracking roughly 45,000 objects in space. So just the number of things that we are able to track and that are moving around there is growing exponentially. It's obviously always been an important part of our national security, but it's becoming even more so given how contested it is, given all the activity that's going on there, and given recent developments that I'll share with you. So why do we care? What do we do with space stuff? Well, this is a list of things that were actually funded by NASA for purposes of putting on spacecraft or helping with astronauts. And then now we use every day, right? Dustbusters were actually meant to clean up some lunar surface that we could then take back and study down here on Earth. Ear thermometers, wireless headsets, memory foam, all built for astronauts. Baby formula was actually something that came out of the ability to try to figure out what we should feed astronauts in space. Artificial limbs, water purification systems, scratchers, lessons, CAT scans, etc. And then camera phones, CMOS, was invented actually right down the road here at Caltech, again, for space applications, and now are ubiquitous. So it's not only that we want to do interesting things in space, make applications for space, but ultimately we want to do those things so that they affect humanity down here on Earth and make the world a better place. So what's next? Well, we had some policy changes in roughly 2011, 2012, where anything prior to that, if you wanted to go to space, you want to do anything in space, you had to do it through the government. Now we have a lot of private and public collaboration. We have reduced costs of access to space. Obviously, Spacex is driving the train here. And just to give you sort of an insight, there was a study that came out this week, and although I can't sort of vouch for the veracity, they had some interesting stats. So NASA had done roughly 119 missions. There was a 90% average cost overrun. 9 in 10 missions were cost overrun. An average mission took about 7 years. So SpaceX has done roughly 16 SpaceX missions. There's been a 1.1% average cost overrun. 5 in 10 of those missions actually have had a cost overrun, but the average project takes about 4 years. So we've seen, something that used to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars to launch something into space, now in orders of magnitude lower in cost, tens of millions of dollars, and dropping dramatically. We're also seeing small satellites, CubeSat, all sorts of things we can do, all sorts of information we can gather. And with that data comes analytics of that data, AI, machine learning. We want to be able to sort of take what we see from space and beam that down. And likewise, we want to do the inverse, take what we know here, beam it up, and maybe actually compute on orbit. We're also seeing the lunar economy sort of start. We, thanks to Artemis, NASA has created an international coalition to build a smaller version of the ISS on the moon. So we're going to be doing all sorts of things on the moon, and we haven't been back since 1969, so lots of reasons to be excited. And then, of course, not only Elon Musk wants to have people on Mars, but everyone's looking towards Mars and ultimately beyond. We're just sort of gathering the initial information about what we know of the observable universe, and we only expect that information to grow, and the insights hopefully will lead to things that we can do for us here on Earth. So that's my brief space introduction. It always blows my mind, so hopefully it was helpful to you. I want to tell you a little bit about Mandala Space Ventures. So I left Idealab at the end of last year and joined Dr. Leon Alkali and team at Mandela in January. And we are a venture studio focused solely on the new space economy. So the venture studio has a couple of components. One is we start companies from scratch. So we have our own research and development efforts. We have a platform where we're onboarding very early stage space companies where they can take advantage of the things that we provide. And then we have an affiliated venture fund called Explore One that makes typical venture investments into things in the space economy. So, our purpose is really to act as co-founders on the studio level. We have a roster of people that I'll sort of quickly run through. But we have people on our team who've actually launched things into space, who've actually launched rovers that have landed on places outside of Earth. And it's very hard to do. Complex is space is a very complex area. You can't sort of iterate quickly and fail fast. The redundancies you need, there are expenses that you don't want to sort of do twice. And so we need to make sure that we're doing it properly. And then ultimately, we want to help innovations across the space economy, helping infrastructure, global communications, national defense and security, et cetera. So on the studio side, aside from just technical strategy, we offer product development, IP licensing, office space, of course, operational support, customer development. The idea here is that these young space companies can focus on product customers, and we can help them worry about all the administrative back-end things that every company has to deal with. We've got a beautiful 5,300 square foot facility on the 4th floor of the Pasadena Playhouse. We're right here in Pasadena, and people always ask, why Pasadena? And the answer is easy when it comes to space. There are 6,500 people at JPL right down the road. Caltech is one of the foremost research institutions on the planet. And if you were starting a space company, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better place to do it than Pasadena. So we're happy to be here. We work with a bunch of other folks, trying to collaborate with them, trying to find unique intellectual property that we can then commercialize, not only for the space industry, but commercialization at large. And we're, very young, but growing quite quickly, and we're very excited about all these potential collaborations. Again, this all starts with Dr. Leon Alkali. He spent 32 years with JPL as a JPL fellow and started thinking about this, I think, many years ago, and ultimately started Mandela last year. And we are well on our way to building out an amazing team. Here's just a few of us. And then, again, what sets us apart, I think, from anybody else is the roster of technical consultants that we have. So we have people that have actually launched things into space, put things on orbit, put things on planets, and we couldn't be more grateful for their help. As I mentioned, we've got an affiliated fund called Explore One that we've made roughly 8 investments out of so far. And our goal is really to be the first place that you come to if you're a scientist, if you're a researcher, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're doing anything in the new space economy. We want to be the first call that you make. And I'll sort of end with one last note, which is, space is vast. We sort of saw that earlier in the presentation, but the space economy is quite broad. So, things like tracking climate change, sensors and detectors, propulsion devices, all sorts of things to fit within the area that we want to operate. I think that's it. I sort of will leave you with that. Happy to open it up to questions, but obviously very excited about what we can do with space and what we can do here in Pasadena, and very excited about Mandala Space Ventures.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm feeling inspired. It's so good to be back and being inspired. John is going to be asking or going around to get some Q&A. I will be monitoring on the Zoom meeting. Please put your questions into the Q&A panel there. We will answer them as we are able. Please use this time for questions. Keep them short and sweet, and make sure your sentences have a question mark at the end. If you have comments, you can always talk to Alex after.
Thanks, Christy. Does anybody like to start?
So there's some incubator or something like that in El Segundo that's is a defense space. Is that
Starburst, I believe, is the one you're talking about.
So how do you compare to that?
Yeah, sure. Starburst is doing great things. They're very well connected to industry, to governments, et cetera. But I would consider Starburst very light touch, and I would consider Mandela very heavy touch. So we want to be true co-founders with the companies. We're coming in at the very earliest stages of company creation. We're not an accelerator. We don't do 10-week programs and show you how to build a pitch deck and put you in front of a bunch of investors. We're actually building with you. So I think the biggest distinction is that light touch versus heavy touch.
Alex, thanks for that presentation.
My pleasure.
And I agree that the space economy, I think we're just at the beginning stages. It's almost, to me, feels like the beginning of the internet, when nobody knew what the internet was and what is it going to be used for. And fast forward to today, I think that question has been answered. So I think the space economy right now is kind of in a similar situation. From your standpoint, based on your experience at Idealab and now at Mandela, what do you see some of the opportunities or the businesses that you have met with that are either applying for some venture capital, or even companies that you may have turned down, and maybe some of the reasons why you felt they weren't ready for venture capital?
Sure. Yeah, I think in the space world, it's been so long where you had one customer or a series of customers, and that was the government, and that's changing. And what we really want to see is real commercialization outside of just having the government as a customer. And again, because of the collaboration between the government and private sector, we're seeing more and more opportunities to do that. In fact, the happenings in Ukraine, the government is leaning on private companies to provide intelligence through high-res photos, et cetera, that we're sharing with folks there. So you're seeing more of that. I think ultimately, we're also seeing software applications now being provided to space. We actually have a company in our portfolio called Continuum Space that has taken a bunch of the launch software that JPL had, licensed that, and now if you're a small company or a small startup and you want to launch things into space, but do it properly and plan it properly and make sure that your thing is going to work once you launch and not fail, you could use something like Continuum Space to do that. So we're seeing all sorts of new propulsion devices, all sorts of new sensors and detectors. You hear a lot of talk about things like synthetic aperture radar, LiDAR, all things that will help us understand not only space, but understand Earth in a much more high fidelity way.
We have a question from the Zoom. Are you looking at any, beyond any U.S. markets? And if so, what are the most important markets for space startups?
Yeah, I think right now we're pretty much focused on the U.S. market, but obviously the European Space Agency is doing amazing things. There's a lot of activity in Europe. I think if you look at it from a competitive angle, the two sort of adversaries that the United States has always been concerned about with regard to space is Russia and China. For example, China has demonstrated that they can actually launch something up into orbit, grab a satellite, take it up into higher orbit and drop it off. Russia has shown and demonstrated its ability to launch a missile from Earth and blow up a satellite, which in the last demonstration, I believe it was in November, scattered something like 2,500 pieces of space debris into orbit. So not a good thing. We think space obviously is global, but where we're focused on right now is the U.S. Sort of space command, but ultimately for partnerships with ESA, the European Space Agencies, and others is going to be welcome for sure.
The way I see the space economy is that there's a lot of really interesting opportunities that are developing in it. And what I mean by that is you touched upon climate control, certainly GPS, relying on the geo satellites, and let's see, what else? There was also the just various services that can be provided by the space industry that are service oriented, not necessarily hardware. So we don't need people starting up a business that are rocket scientists, so to speak. What do you see from a service standpoint that would be something that would be beneficial for your company and also for the industry that would eventually maybe make it a good acquisition target?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a ton of activity in sort of Earth observation and Earth observation satellites. So obviously, depending on where it is in orbit, you get different pictures of what the Earth looks like, and you can make various analyses on what that means for us. But if you go back to sort of SAR and synthetic aperture radar, you can look through clouds, you can look at night, you can see things that you don't need a direct sort of line of sight to see. And so what does that mean for monitoring climate change, for example? Can we monitor wildfires before they get too big? Can we monitor, what's happening in our oceans and rivers? Can we monitor, all sorts of things? And the answer is yes. And what we're seeing is just the crazy amount of data that all these satellites are creating, and the ability to sort of parse that data, understand that data, put actionable insights resulting from that data into action, I think is going to be increasingly important. So there's a number of areas where not only is it going to be interesting from a space perspective, and we've always sort of been looking down on Earth, and now we're starting to look up into more of the observable universe. But really, how does that help us down here? That's what we're really excited about, is all these technologies that ultimately are launched into space, primarily for space applications, tend to have a big effect down here. And our thesis is that sort of commercialization from the lab or from space into something that will help us here is being shrunk dramatically. So if we can take what used to take 8 to 10 years and shrink it down to 12 to 18 months, we're going to be doing some interesting things.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for coming here today. I was wondering if you might be able to comment on the regulatory framework, as we commercialize. It used to be, as you mentioned, you had one customer as the government, and so the regulatory framework was quote unquote simple because of that monolithic customer. Now, as we go into commercial, oftentimes we've found that our regulations kind of lag technology in many sectors, right? I was wondering if you could comment on that and what you see as the challenges and both in terms of the difficulties, but also in terms of the upside in terms of regulatory.
Sure. Yeah. No, great question. I mean, it's a very complicated space. No pun intended. You've got a tons of differing and competing factions from all over the globe. The U.S. has Space Command and Space Force, and interestingly enough, again, China and Russia spun up their version of Space Command in 2015. We didn't spin ours up until 2019. So we're increasingly concerned and interested in the goings on in space, and I think the regulatory environment is still quite dramatic to deal with. On the upside, again, there's this newly collaborative cooperation between the U.S. government and the private sector, which we just didn't have before. That's opening up huge opportunities for not only young companies and established companies, but anybody who's interested in doing things. And the pathways that you have to sort of get involved are opening up wider each and every year. I mentioned I was at a conference yesterday, I'm going back today, where the entire focus is really on how do we, as industry, help the government sort of get where they need to go with regard to what they want to do in space. And that change, I can't emphasize enough of how interesting that's going to be, and the amount of interesting companies that are going to come with that. And of course, SpaceX is the elephant in the room, right? The things that they've been able to do, they're taking U.S. astronauts to the space station. And if you had told me, 15 years ago that was going to happen, I thought you were crazy. So we're seeing a ton of interesting things, and I think as complex and as bureaucratic as the U.S. government is, we're seeing lots of headway in making things easier for young space companies.
Okay, we have a few questions from the Zoom. There's a number around your capital. What's the typical growth multiple of invested capital? How much capital do you have under management? Are you institutionally backed? What is the average median exit time frame for your investment?
All great questions, and I will answer them in a slippery way.
Okay.
The venture fund is $20 million. We've raised some amounts of millions into the studio as well to start our own companies. Obviously, with space, you need a long time horizon. These things don't happen overnight. You know, we're not looking for eyeballs or advertising, and so we're trying to build serious technology with serious positive impact, and those things take a long time. I think the good news is that there's a lot of patient capital out there right now. I think the other piece of good news is, again, the shrinking of the timeline of doing these exciting things in space. Things like Continuum, again, one of our portfolio companies, is a SaaS platform. So the timeline to revenue and the timeline to exit are probably shorter than if we were building propulsion devices or rocket engines, et cetera. So a lot of these things are extremely capital intensive. You know, we understand that. We're operating at the very early stages. So, you know, our check sizes are somewhere between 100K and $1 million. And if you're building, you know, something like a SpaceX, you need hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have no disillusions about that. We want to be early, and we want to make sure that we sort of put you on the path to success. But this is a very capital intensive business, and you know, we're very well aware of that.
The second question is, are most technology, or like the fifth question, are most technology derived from DARPA government agency that is commercially licensed?
Yeah, a lot of it is commercially licensed. A lot of it is built on sort of RFPs from the government. So, you know, DARPA, DOD, DOE, all sorts of government acronyms are out there saying, hey, here, young company, here's what we're looking for. If you have something in those lines, why don't you come to us? We'll provide, you know, the startup's favorite words of non-dilutive funding. But there's a catch, right? I mean, now you're focused on something where you really need to hit their milestones and hit what they're trying to do. And we sort of joke, although it's not a joke, that sometimes that path can be addictive. Now you're chasing these government non-dilutive funding, and it may take you away from true commercialization opportunities. So, you know, we love what the government's doing. Obviously, we love to be party to some of the programs that they're running, but we also need to see our companies have a true path to broader commercialization.
Anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask?
I was going to ask about SBIR type funding, but also does the government ever take like direct investment as an investor? I think they do sometimes, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, SBIR, STTR, there's a number of programs where you can get these non-dilutive grants. The government sometimes does do direct investments. I mean, I think the most well-known is InQtel, which is a government sort of backed venture capital firm. It's a nonprofit, amazingly. So even though I'm sure they want returns, they just funnel that back into more investments into young companies. But there are some direct investment opportunities, but for the most part, it's through grants and things like that, from my understanding.
Question over here.
Alex, in your opinion, in regards to regulatory, logistical, technological limitations, what sector are you, is there a need for most innovation, or are you excited about the innovation in?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much activity in space. It's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around. I think, you know, the amount of data that's being created from all these additional things that we're launching into space is really fascinating. And what do you do with that? And, you know, how do you make sense of that, I think is really interesting. I think all the new sensors and detectors that are being put in space that will ultimately find their way down here is fascinating. I keep talking about SAR, but what's the next level of SAR? What does that look like? You know, what happens when you've got a bunch of interesting radar components on your phone coming? It's already here for the most part. There's just so many different areas that are exciting. It's hard for me to pick one. I know I'm not answering your questions, but just the amazing breadth of activity that we're seeing and technologies that we're seeing is just fascinating. And I think we're going to, you know, to John's point earlier, this is sort of like the beginning of the internet. You know, who knows what we're going to do with all this stuff, and the sort of optionality and the activity that's going to result from that is what I'm most excited about.
Question over here.
Hi, Alex. I'm an adventurer and a physiologist, and a number of years ago, I started a company called Equator Ventures. I was working as a stem cell scientist in Singapore at the time. And since then, I developed a patented training system to prepare for our adventures, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in that area.
You're saying a training system for people
For physiology.
for physiology to sort of get the most out of your body, if you will.
Exactly.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. We can talk offline. I'd have to think about that. But that's very interesting.
We're almost out of time, so I do want to ask one more question. And since I don't see any hands raised, I'm going to go ahead and ask that. So we've seen the opportunities at Google with regards to Google Map, and you talked about looking down versus from the Earth looking up. And I think that from a commercialization standpoint, looking down at this point maybe has the most revenue generating potential versus looking up. So Google Maps again is a good example of that. LiDAR, who I think somebody that is in that industry.
I do.
They've used that to discover some ancient civilizations down in the Amazon, I believe. I think, maybe more of that can be used for things like oil exploration, possibly. About a month ago, we had a speaker from Braid Theory that is involved with the blue economy, which is the ocean, and we know how vast the ocean is. So I think from a space standpoint, looking down at the ocean, warming temperatures, La Nina, that type of thing. What do you see, again, using space economy as the platform for these types of technologies and services where we don't necessarily have to be the rocket scientist with a PhD from JPL to be able to do something and be successful at it?
Yeah, I mean, going back to LEO and just the huge number of satellites that are operating in lower Earth orbit, and there's going to be more of them. There's constellations of satellites that are out there doing all sorts of stuff, and because they're closer to Earth, they're higher fidelity. You can get transmission of data quicker. There's less latency, et cetera. So I still think it's really hard for the average Joe like myself to get access to a bunch of raw data and make sense of it. And I think you'll see more companies sort of be a usability layer, for lack of a better word, on top of that raw data. So what if you could say, hey, I want to see what's happening off the coast of Laguna Beach and view it from space for whatever reason you may want to, your seawall is breaking or whatever it may be. I think at some point you'll have access to that data and you'll be able to do that sort of analysis. So I think one of the most interesting things is, again, right now, if you want to buy some pictures of the strip mall that you own in northern Ohio, it's going to cost you 15, 20 grand probably if you want a space picture, right? Ultimately, you're not going to pay anywhere near that much, and you're going to be able to take data, take pictures, take high fidelity activity, and make your own sort of analysis on that. And so that's, to me, really interesting, again, about democratizing sort of the access to this data and ultimately putting it in the hands of everybody. And, we're getting to that point, and it's going to be very interesting to see what people come up with.
So in the past, we've heard of the term SaaS, software as a service. I think going forward, we might need to change it to satellite as a service, and that would be something that you and your company can maybe help somebody develop.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing anything in space, we'd love to talk to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Alex. That was amazing. It's so great to see your faces and be back here in person today. I want to thank, again, Industrious. Go check out their co-working space upstairs. Enjoy their delicious donuts and coffee. We're very grateful. And to Capital Trust Partners. Next month, we're going to be hearing from the brilliant minds at Idle. They're going to be talking to us about social media impersonation and AI and how to protect ourselves. So again, we're meeting on the first Friday of every month. And thank you to everyone. Have a safe and peaceful weekend. For those of you that are on the Zoom, we are going to wrap up the Zoom now as we don't have a moderator for open networking today. But for those of you that are in the room, please stay. We're going to take a picture of Alex with our audience. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to those of you on the line.